Robert Mueller apparently disagreeing to some extent with the prosecutors in New York about the extent of Michael Cohen's cooperation. Now understand that what Robert Mueller appears to be focused on in the memo, which we're gonna talk about now, isn't necessarily just the campaign finance violations that the federal prosecutors are talking about. So in terms of cooperation, he said this. Michael Cohen also has gone to significant lengths to assist the special counsel's investigation. He has met with the SCO on 7 occasions, voluntarily provided the SCO with information about his own conduct and that of others on core topics under investigation by the SCO, and committed to continuing to assist the SCO's investigation. The information he has provided has been credible and consistent with other evidence obtained in the SCO's ongoing investigation. And so look, that's pretty vague, although they do use the term core topics, and so we can imagine what some of those might be. Yeah. They do give some specific examples as well, and part of this ties back to a topic that came up about a week or two ago, and that was the Moscow Tower project for Donald Trump. And Mueller says this: the fact that Cohen continued to work on the Trump Tower Moscow project and discuss it with individual one well into the campaign was material to the ongoing congressional and SCO investigations, particularly because it occurred at a time of sustained efforts by the Russian government to interfere with the US presidential election. And so that is apparently one of their core concerns. It came up just a couple of weeks ago, but it is something that they have apparently been talking about. And it's interesting, they point out in pretty stark detail how originally when Michael Cohen was working with that office, he lied about it, not just publicly, but also to the SCO. It was only after some evidence was presented that he had been lying that he switched up his story and began to say things that turned out to be credible and consistent with other sources of information.
Yeah, so now let's look at analyzing what Mueller is saying as opposed to the federal prosecutors, because Michael Cohen charged by both, okay? So the federal prosecutor is not happy with his cooperation overall. Mueller more happy about how he cooperated with the core investigation. Now, what does that mean? My sense of it, based on the overall context, is Mueller views the core investigation to be related to the election. So if you're talking to the Russians about the Trump Tower in Moscow during the election, that's related to the election. If you're having meetings with the Russians and then lying about it, as Michael Flynn did, that is related to the elections. If you colluded in getting stolen emails from the Russians, that is related to the election. If you had other crimes, which Cohen and Trump have done, it appears based on publicly available evidence for decades, well, that's the federal prosecutors in New York, and that would be their business and not Robert Mueller's business as the special counsel. Now, and that is why he handed off some of those stuff to other prosecutors. Now, among those crimes might be, as I've been saying all along, money laundering for the Russians. Now, I think that would be related to the investigation if it turns out he owes them money, or he's done favors for them, or they've done favors for him. But this indicates, and so the not great news, if you ask me, is that Mueller did not perceive his mandate to be anything beyond this specific election. So if Trump was in bed with the Russians before the election, he apparently, I might be overanalyzing, but based on this information, it appears that he thought that was outside of his mandate. Not that you shouldn't do anything about it, but he handed it off to federal prosecutors in New York, where those crimes might have been committed.
Yeah. Do you think that there's anything to the difference between the approach of New York and the approach of Mueller in the three-dimensional chess game of pardons that's going on too?
Yeah, there's 3 layers to that. It's a great point,
yeah.
Nick. So one is political, which is, hey, Trump's constantly been attacking the so-called witch hunt of the special counsel, trying to fire the special counsel. Well, you can't, it's much harder to fire federal prosecutors in New York and elsewhere, and he hasn't done as much propaganda against them, that he hasn't laid the field, et cetera. Then there's the secondary issue, which is who can receive pardons and who can't from the president.
Yes.
People at the federal level can receive pardons from the president, but not at the state level. So if they wanted to make it fully pardon-proof, they would then hand it off to not federal, but state prosecutors. So, and there are plenty of crimes that Michael Cohen might have committed and Donald Trump might have committed.
And Paul Manafort.
And certainly Paul Manafort at the state level. So then they could not get a pardon under any circumstance for those. But that some of those investigations have begun, but they're a little bit earlier in the process than these federal investigations.
Right.
I want to read one more section just because I like a bit of terminology used by Robert Mueller in the sentencing memo. This is again about the Trump Tower Moscow project, and Mueller says, in or around November 2015, Cohen received the contact information for and spoke with a Russian national who claimed to be a, quote, trusted person in the Russian Federation who could offer the campaign, quote, political synergy and, quote, synergy on a government level. The defendant recalled that this person repeatedly proposed a meeting between individual one and the president of Russia. The person told Cohen that such a meeting could have a phenomenal impact not only in a political but in a business dimension as well, referring to the Moscow project. Because there is, quote, no bigger warranty in any project than consent of the president of Russia. Cohen, however, did not follow up on this invitation. And so I just note the inclusion of political synergy because you are likely to hear no collusion was mentioned in the document.
I believe that that's about the same thing. Yes,
maybe.
Let's look up the word collusion.
Exactly.
Political synergy might be a
a pretty close synonym.
But
yes.
importantly, and what we've been leading up to is, as I've been saying this whole time, there does seem to be disagreement between the federal prosecutors and Robert Mueller in terms of what sentence he should serve, at least subtly. And so, skipping ahead a bit to the control room, Mueller concludes by saying, the government respectfully submits that the court should give due consideration to the defendant's efforts set forth above, and that it would be appropriate to allow the defendant to serve any sentence imposed in this case concurrently with any sentence imposed in United States v. Cohen. So hypothetically, I don't know how long that sentence is, but that could take some time off of his full sentence.
Right, so they're recommending that it not be served back to back, but at the same time, which of course greatly reduces his sentence. And so that difference between the federal prosecutors in New York and Mueller's office is very important because Mueller is saying, as to the core issues that I am investigating, which is the election, Cohen has been fairly forthcoming and very helpful. And the federal prosecutors are saying, when it comes to the other crimes, not so much. And hence the difference in how they're treating him.
Yeah. And you might have read earlier today when people were talking about what the Mueller team was likely to come out with, we were expecting both these memos about Michael Cohen, but also information about Paul Manafort. How is it that he actually breached his agreement with the SCO? And according to Jake Tapper, he reported that Robert Mueller's team will file its description of how Paul Manafort breached his cooperation agreement largely under seal. So unless something has changed since we went live, it is likely that for the time being, we won't know exactly why. And I mean, there are a couple of reasons why they might want to hide that information, but it's probably not good for Paul Manafort that they need it to be hidden still.
Yeah. I think that if Cohen was expecting no jail time and all of a sudden got this, does he give up more information? Does he then say, okay, what do you need? What do you need for me to serve no prison time? Do you need, evidence on crime X? And he'll probably offer a lower one, right? And they'll go, right? Well, again, look, we can't know with certainty if Trump did money laundering, but there's so much available evidence. He buys properties and sells them at much higher rates to the Russians now, which makes no economic sense except for it's money laundering 101. He works with the same exact banks as the Russians. He puts his money in Deutsche Bank, what was called the global laundromat. Okay, that's how much money laundering that the Russians did through Deutsche Bank, and Trump was in the same bucket. By the way, Deutsche Bank information is now in Mueller's hands. So a lot of that is out there, and if Cohen is privy to that, and he might not be privy to it, right? Then he certainly has that chip in his pocket. And if he does, this is probably the time he's gonna wanna use it. Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.